Hello, I'm Tom DiPietro with the Green Mountain Water Environment Association. Joining me today is Eamon Twohig with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. Eamon works in the Residuals Management and Emerging Contaminants program. Eamon, thank you very much for joining me today.
Of course, Tom, happy to be here, thanks.
So the Green Mountain Water Environment Association is a trade organization. Our members are comprised of drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater operators working across the state of Vermont. But our conversation today is going to focus on wastewater, and specifically a byproduct of the wastewater treatment process. Eamon, thanks again for joining me, and I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about sludge, how it's generated, where it comes from.
Sure, well, sludge is the solid byproduct of the wastewater treatment plant process, as you said. So incoming sewage to the wastewater treatment facility is the solids that are in that material will be settled out, and the liquid portion will be treated and discharged, but the solids are held back at the plant and stored and eventually need to be managed. So that's what we would call wastewater sludge.
And is sludge the same as septage, or are those two different things?
They're somewhat similar in the sense that, you know, when you have a septage system at your residential home, the septage tank is where the solids are supposed to settle, and then the liquid portion would be going to your leach field and discharged to the soil-based treatment system. So when septage tanks are pumped in Vermont and anywhere, the solids are usually pumped out, and more often than not, that's taken to a wastewater treatment facility for additional treatment. So they are somewhat similar. It's just a matter of septage coming out of a septage tank and sludge coming out of a wastewater treatment facility.
And I think the majority of Vermonters are on septic tanks still. Is that correct?
That's correct, Tom. About 55% of Vermonters are served by septic or on-site wastewater systems. And in 2020, we managed in Vermont roughly about 45 million gallons of septage. And the vast majority of that goes to the wastewater treatment facilities where it's treated before it's before the septage is discharged, or I'm sorry, the effluent is discharged. And that does contribute to solids at the treatment plant, so that will add to the sludge volume at the wastewater plant.
And so one more term I'd like you to clarify for me. So we have talked about sludge and septage. What about biosolids? How are biosolids different from those two?
Yeah, good question. So biosolids is basically if you have sludge generated by a wastewater facility, that sludge can be treated in a process, and that process is designed to reduce pathogenic content of the material. So it might be, for example, on anaerobic digestion or high temperature composting or something like that would reduce the pathogen content. Once the pathogen content is reduced and demonstrated, and it also meets certain standards for metals. We also in Vermont have a standard for PCBs. Then if it meets those, it can be termed biosolids, and that's all done and demonstrated through a permitting process through the solid waste certification process here through our program.
And so I've seen biosolids referred to in a lot of different ways. I've heard of a Class B biosolid, a Class A biosolid of exceptional quality. So what's the difference between these different types? It sounds like they're regulated differently as well.
Yeah, they are regulated differently, and really the only difference is the pathogenic content of the material. A Class A or exceptional quality biosolid has undergone more or typically an advanced treatment process that will reduce the pathogens further. So a Class B biosolid has had pathogenic content reduced, but not as much as a Class A or exceptional quality, and they are regulated differently. A Class B biosolid would have to be land applied at a permitted location. It would be would be demonstrated to meet the solid waste rules, that location. So it would have to have certain conditions like setbacks to surface water, depth to groundwater, depth to bedrock, things like that, similar to a septic system. And there's also additional prohibitions that go with utilizing a field for Class B biosolids. It has to be done with the nutrient load has to be accounted for so that we're making sure that we're putting down the right amount of nutrients on the land. And there are some cropping restrictions and other things that would go into the permit for that site like that. The difference for an exceptional quality or Class A biosolid, which are very similar, Vermont recognizes exceptional quality biosolids. The definition that the EPA provides for Class A and EQ are very similar, but an exceptional quality is a little bit of a higher standard. And so Vermont, we recognize exceptional quality biosolids And those, once they're generated by the treatment facility, those can be distributed to the general public. The pathogenic content is reduced to the point where the state of Vermont and EPA have deemed it safe for the general public to utilize as a fertilizer. So that's typically what is done with a Class A or exceptional quality biosolid. It would be used as a fertilizer could go to the general public, it could go directly to farmers, things like that.
And so, yeah, talking specifically about Vermont and our sludge and biosolids. So where do these materials end up in Vermont? Where do they go ultimately?
Yeah, so the management options for sludge and in Vermont, really there's two main options. One is we do landfill sludge in Vermont, other states do as well. And we also recycle the sludge as biosolids back to the land as a soil amendment. And in Vermont, in 2020, we actually recycled about 68% of the sludge from our wastewater plants as biosolids. There is a caveat there in that we will export sludge to the third parties out of state who will then treat that sludge to biosolids and typically land apply it relatively in the geographic region of where their facility is. So, New York will accept sludge from Vermont, Quebec, New Hampshire, even Massachusetts. So biosolids are going across borders, and they're going to where there's a need for nutrients to grow crops. And roughly about, I would say 40% of the material that's beneficially used that comes from Vermont, it stays in state. And the rest of it will go out and be used as biosolids in New York, Quebec, New Hampshire, Massachusetts.
Right. As I understand it, in Vermont, there's really one landfill that's accepting the sludge materials right now. Is that correct?
That's true. We have one active landfill in Coventry, Vermont, and they do take sludge from Vermont facilities. In 2020, they took about 3,000 wet tons, and that's of the total 11,000 to 12,000 wet tons that we produced. So a significant portion.
Great. Well, Eamon, thank you for speaking with me today. There's a lot of great information. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Tom. Thank you.